Hey everybody, it is 6:03 p.m. and so we're going to go ahead and get started. So Willie, instead of me typing back to you, yes, that's perfect. I will send you a link here sometime tonight, okay? For 9:30 tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
You're quite welcome. I hope everybody's having a good week and not been negatively impacted by yet another tropical storm, Beta. We've had lots of rain here, but supposedly we're drying out and going to have a nice weekend. So I hope you guys are all doing well. As you know, last week we talked a little bit more about the case study that is actually due this coming Sunday by 11:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We went over it pretty extensively in our Zoom meeting in week 2. Last week, we just kind of hit some highlights and questions. So tonight, I don't want to keep, beating this dead horse, but if you have any questions about case study number 1, now's the time to ask them. So I'm going to kind of leave it open for everybody. Going once, going twice.
If we have already started, like I already did most of it and was writing it in paragraphs, do you want me to change it into bullet points or just leave it as paragraph form?
You can leave it in paragraph form. So that's fine. If you've already started on it and you did it in paragraphs, that's fine. If you did it in bullet points, that's fine too. I'm not going to get real hung up on formatting. It's really much more about the content. Okay. And then Haley asks in the chat, for the target demographics, do we need to break down the data points by student demographics? No, I don't want you to spend a whole lot of time, honestly. This is not a data analysis class. This is really just to kind of get a sense of what the community's like and the major sorts of characteristics, okay? And yes, it is referring to the demographics from the target market survey. Okay? So a lot of it is somewhat repetitive, but that's by design, because when you're building an action plan, sometimes you have to repeat stuff just so that it all kind of flows and makes sense. And unfortunately, because we're doing this case study in a sort of piecemeal fashion, like I said, it's a little bit hard. If you were doing this all at once, some of this would make a way more sense. But hopefully by the time you're done and you've completed case study 1, 2, and 3, 2 is your midterm, 3 is your final, then you will see exactly what everything is. So then what exactly do I want turned in? Let me get back here to the Moodle course and I can show you. Okay, so for case study number 1, oops, I just passed it, sorry about that. Let me go ahead and do a share screen real quick with you guys. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. So what you're going to be turning in is going to be these things here. You're not going to turn in the actual action plan. Remember, we're holding that till the very last week of the course, but you are going to turn in the data worksheet. Sorry, my computer here has been a little wonky. So anyway, you're going to turn in the data worksheet, the product demographics, the target market narrative, and the target demographics piece, okay? So you're gonna have 4 things you're gonna turn into me. Again, the target demographics narrative, the target market narrative, the product demographics narrative, and the data worksheet, okay? Okay, any other? Hey, go ahead. Hi, Allegra.
Hi. So you had said that you're not particular about format. So for all 4 worksheets, I kind of just have like for the data, like my demographics, and then a follow-up that's just kind of like an exposition from some of our other readings, citing from some of our other readings how those demographics play out. Is that, or are you just really looking for the data itself?
Well, I don't want you to go back and redo what you've done. That sounds great. That's perfect. But you don't have to do that to everybody else unless you just want to. I'm not requiring you to list any references or do a reference list or in-text citations or anything like that with this assignment. That's really, we're not going to worry about those pieces for an action plan. It's just not necessary. So like I said, if you've already done that, don't redo it. It's fine. Turn it in. But if you haven't, just know moving ahead, you don't have to do that for this case study or number 2 or number 3.
Okay, so we really are just dealing with the raw data and then just kind of transferring that into the next pieces that we'll be working with.
Yes, ma'am. You got it.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and so Haley, no, I tried to simplify all of this as much as I could and for you guys, because I know that this can be a little bit overwhelming. So you do not need references, you do not need in-text citations. If you've done them, that's fine, but you don't have to, okay? So what I'm telling you here supersedes what, because remember, I built this assignment about 3 weeks ago. So I try to keep it updated as things move along. But sometimes I miss a piece, but no references needed. Any other questions, guys, before we move on for tonight? Going once, going twice? You can always email me personally too, and I'll be more than happy to answer your email or schedule a time to talk to you or whatever we can do, okay? All right, so without further ado, let's talk about the PowerPoint presentation for tonight. So again, I'm going to do a share screen with you guys. Let's see, share screen, here we go. Okay, remember again, I do apologize. For some reason, Zoom won't let us put this into the actual slideshow. So you have to look at it from this view. So sorry, not the best way, but that's okay. We can hopefully live with it. So last week we talked a lot about data and information about urban communities and urban schools. And we did some comparative analysis between a very affluent school district in Texas, Highland Park, and the Dallas Independent School District. And if you remember, we talked as well about, how and why Highland Park should be doing as well as they're doing. And the fact that because parents have access to lots and lots of resources, students can get private tutoring, they have all kinds of supports that unfortunately our urban students do not get. But however, even though we oftentimes are looking at an absolute measure in terms of charting student achievement, that really the growth model is probably a better measure of how well our schools and our students are doing. And quite frankly, it has been shown that when you do a growth model to determine student achievement, our urban schools do actually really, really well in that model. The whole idea behind a growth model is that you take the student from wherever they are, whether that's below grade level, on grade level, or even above grade level, and you move them at least 1 year in terms of student achievement. Anything above 1 year is considered exceptional growth. Unfortunately, that model is not used very widely yet. Hopefully over time, we'll see that more and more states and school districts and parishes, et cetera, adopt that model. But in that model, like I said, it really does benefit and show us how much we're growing our students. When you do that deep dive sort of analysis in some school districts, particularly affluent ones, you'll see that kids actually have negative growth. So they may come in, let's say they're a 6th grader, and they come in reading at the 10th grade level. Well, by the end of their 6th grade year, they're only reading at the 9th grade level. So they actually lost a year's worth of achievement. But like I said, it's not widely used yet, but it is a very powerful model and really, I think, tells a better story, gives us a better picture of where our students are. So continuing this discussion, let's see if there we go. Unfortunately, all too often, the more you read about urban schools and the research surrounding their success and their challenges, one of the things that you see a lot is what people call the less than mindset. So what I mean by that, when we talk about the less than, urban students see themselves as less important, than students from maybe a middle class or an affluent background. They oftentimes feel like they're not deserving of great teaching and great learning opportunities and all of these things that should be happening. Also, too, the more you study and read about urban students and our students from poverty, they oftentimes will see status symbols as a way to improve their self-worth. I can't tell you how many times I've had teachers in the past say to me, well, I don't understand why they can't afford their school supplies. You know, he's walking around in a $150 pair of tennis shoes. It's not that they don't prioritize the school supplies or whatever, but because the students and the children often have a very low self-esteem and all of that, they tend to look for those status symbols that make them feel like they're equal to their more affluent peers. And then that's very widely accepted and expected within some of their communities. A lot of people also think that urban students have a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset, which is not necessarily true. If you're not familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, she talks a lot about mindsets and how they impact students and their learning. So just to give you kind of the 1 second definition, according to Carol Dweck, if you have a fixed mindset, those are generally going to be your students who've been told all their lives, you're really smart, you're really intelligent and all of that. And so they think that when they get into school, they don't have to work as hard maybe if they need to or whatever, and they really have a hard time when they experience failure. Whereas students with a growth mindset believe and have been taught that, gosh, if I don't get something the first time, you learn from your failure, you work harder and harder and harder. A lot of people call it the grit factor. So they've done a ton of research about this, and people who have that growth mindset or have that grit factor do very, very well over their lifetimes in terms of learning, career, jobs, you name it. So one of the things that is really important with our urban students is that we develop and help them to develop that growth mindset. So that's a whole topic for another course, but it certainly is something that can be impactful.
Can I interrupt for just a second? Okay,
go
so
ahead.
I teach high school, and my kids, actually, I made them read an article this year already about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, because they did a study, and the kids who were able to recognize their mistakes had a growth mindset, whereas the kids who kind of oh, well, I made a mistake, it's fine, whatever, and ignored it, had that fixed mindset. So one way of getting them to change that might be to teach them to recognize and how to fix their mistakes.
Excellent point. I love it. If you don't mind, share that article with me and I'll post it for everybody. So I think that's a great activity to do with your students. So that they do kind of understand themselves and how they view the world, and so that you can help and support them. So excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of these to you, but also to be aware that a lot of our urban youth lack what I would call, or you might call, experiential learning. So, for example, my daughter and I were talking the other day about this, that, I was a teacher, my ex-husband was a teacher, and so we couldn't afford, the big grand vacations and stuff like that. But every year we would go on a road trip. And I love history. And so we would go and visit, historical homes, or we would go to historical landmarks, or, whatever. And we were talking about how much that influenced her growing up, and how she has such an understanding now in context of places and events and things like that even relate to current events today. Well, unfortunately, a lot of our students that live within the inner city or the urban centers don't have that kind of experiential learning. I know that really hit home for me when I was a middle school principal. One of the things that we made sure we did every year is we took our students on an overnight trip to a college or university. But we also tried to take them to places in Dallas where maybe, just sometimes just for fun, you know, this may be a Saturday field trip or whatever. So we had a group of students that we were taking. Now keep in mind, Spence Middle School sits right at the corner practically the US 75, if you're familiar with Dallas, and one of the major streets right where City Place is. Okay, so it's literally downtown. It's now surrounded by the uptown area, but back in those days, it was the highest crime area in the entire city of Dallas. So we were going to take them ice skating at the Galleria, which is only about maybe 10 miles north of where we were. So we're talking about this trip, we're getting ready, we're loading the bus and all of that. And as we start driving north, almost every single student started talking about, I've never been here. I've never been this far away from my home. Students within our community literally had not even gone 10 miles north of their homes. So we have to really remember that experiential learning that we would expect, or maybe, at least when you live in the city of Dallas, you think you would, like I said, it's a big city, it's very cosmopolitan, yeah. You would think people would travel with their children outside of that sort of core community where they live. That's not always true. We also have to remember too that a lot of our urban children and our children from poverty come to school with a vocabulary that is 50% less than students from more affluent backgrounds. So vocabulary building is an essential component, particularly in those early grades. So pre-K is essential. In fact, I know in Dallas, I started really pushing to get pre-K starting at age 3. Full day pre-K age 3, age 4. Some of our students were ready to go on to kindergarten. Some of them needed that pre-K 5 and then into kindergarten, because we have to build that background knowledge, that schema, that vocabulary, give them those experiential learning opportunities and all of those things, so that by the time they get to first grade, and certainly between first, second, and third, they're on an equal footing with every other child in the district. Okay? Comments or questions about that piece of it? Okay, so I'm not one of those professors generally who likes to tell a lot of war stories. If you've had some of the other professors in our program, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I do want to give you some context. So I'm going to pull up from my experiences as a principal, just to kind of help you see where success happens and how it was able to be accomplished. So I was a principal at 4 different schools in my career: elementary, middle school, a big, huge comprehensive high school, and a magnet high school. So I've kind of seen pretty much every model there is out there. So my first principalship was at Rosemont Elementary, which is in Dallas, Texas. If you're familiar with the Dallas area, it's located in Kessler Park, which is just, they are located just south of Interstate 30, kind of between Hampton Road and Colorado Boulevard, sort of in that vicinity. It's a very unusual community in that you had some, they called themselves early pioneers, who had moved into the community and were very committed to the public schools. These were mostly middle to upper middle class families. But we also had a lot of students who were coming from some pretty severe poverty situations. So it was a very unique mix of students and all of that. So what's interesting too about Rosemont is that's actually where I began my teaching career. So I had taught there for many years, and then 5 years later, I came back as their principal. So that was a little bit of a challenge, because some of the teachers who had mentored me as a baby teacher were still there. And so I was now their principal as opposed to their peer. But one of the things that I really learned, and I guess this was in many ways sort of my trial by fire, when we talked about urban education. So I'm going to highlight 4 students who, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was, but it was probably before some of you were even born. But these children have stayed with me all of these years because they taught me so much as a principal about the reality that our kids live in. So let's talk first about Joaquin. So Joaquin was a fourth grader when I got to know him. He struggled a little bit with English, didn't seem to be terribly interested in school, was oftentimes tardy or late to school, and he would fall asleep in class. Sound familiar? Um, Not a bad kid. He wasn't disruptive or anything like that. He just wasn't engaged. So we were really concerned about the fact that he was falling asleep in class, always late to school, never seemed to, never did his homework, etc. Once he got to school, if we could keep him awake, he did well. So in talking with Joaquin, it took a while, but he finally opened up to me and shared with me why he was always late to school. His mom was a stripper. That's how she earned her living. And she was gone basically before the kids got home from school. And she worked all night and was very rarely home before it was time for them to come to school. Joaquin had 4 little brothers and sisters. There were a total of 5 children in the family. Joaquin was the oldest. Joaquin got up every single morning, made breakfast for himself and his siblings, got them ready for school, somehow managed to get them on the city bus. There wasn't a school bus close enough for them. Got them on the city bus and got all of them to school. When he got home in the evenings, it was his responsibility to babysit his siblings, to make dinner, to clean the house, to do the laundry, to do all of the things that you would expect an adult to do. Maybe with, it's okay for kids to have chores, but basically he took on at the right age of being in the 4th grade all the responsibilities of being the parent and the provider. I asked him, I said, do you have enough food, or things like that. Well, Joaquin, because his mother was not only a stripper, she was a drug user, would find her, especially on the weekends, passed out. And so he would go in and he would basically steal money from his mom. So that he had enough money during the week to buy food for his siblings and to have enough money to get everybody to and from school on the bus. Joaquin taught me a whole lot, and still just makes me so sad to this day. Joaquin taught me about the resiliency of kids. Talk about grit. I mean, it would have been very easy for him just to stay home with his brothers and sisters, but he didn't. He took on a very, very adult role. So thankfully, through some really great social workers and people like that, we were able to help Joaquin. And I'm proud to say I got to attend his high school graduation because this kid had something special in him. So we can't assume a lot of times. It would have been real easy for us to just punish Joaquin for being late for school. He's always tardy, detention, blah, blah, blah. But because we didn't do that and we really began to understand his circumstances, we were able to make a real difference in his life. I want to talk next about Brad. Brad's story is pretty short. Brad was just a nice kid. You could tell from his clothes, back then we didn't require uniforms, and things like that. He didn't have much money. So it's the winter holiday season, and Christmas and all of that, and several students, brought gifts to me as the principal. But the gift that I got that year that was the most special to me was from Brad. He brought me as a gift a CD. It was clearly a used CD. It was kind of ratty and torn up and all of that. But, of course, I told him how much I appreciated it, how much I loved it and all of that. And he said, he said, I didn't have money to buy you anything. And I told him, I said, but I don't expect this. I don't want this. I want y'all to keep that money for yourself. But he said, this is my favorite CD in the whole wide world. And because you've always been so kind to me, I want to give this to you so that you have it. So I still have that to this day. And it just reminded me that kids have such a pure heart. And unfortunately, society can beat that out of them. But Brad reminded me of just being a great kid. David has he really has a pretty tragic story. David was the cutest little kid I think I've ever seen. He was just precious and adorable. And he did, you know, he struggled a little bit with school, but with support, you know, he did okay. Well, one day, David didn't show up for school, and we got really concerned and tried to call his home, all of that. But come to find out that he had been left at home alone by himself overnight. David was in the second grade, obviously way too young to be left at home. And we knew there'd been a major fire in the neighborhood, but we didn't connect the dots. And the reason David didn't come to school was because while he was left at home alone as a second grader, again, mom and dad were both drug users. We had no idea where they were. Their house caught on fire, and David died very tragically. And like I said, it stays with you. I've attended way too many kids' funerals in my lifetime, students and former students. But it also reminded me too, I felt so much regret because I wish there had been something we could have known or done to have helped David. But as a friend told me, this sounds so crass, but she's right, Casey, you can't save the minute. No matter how good our intentions are, I had an amazing teaching staff and faculty and support people and all of those things. But if we had found a way to connect with David, I can't help but wonder if we wouldn't have prevented that horrible tragedy. Then I guess the last one, the student's name is Richard. Richard and his younger brother came to school every single day, and they were extremely neglected, you could tell. Their clothes smelled of urine and feces. They were very, very dirty. They were way behind their peers in terms of educational progress. It got so bad that thankfully, even in an elementary school, we had a shower in the gym. So we would take them before school even started, and my coach, Coach Red, he would take them in there and have them shower. And we got donations of clothes and stuff, and we put clean clothes on them, and then we would all take turns taking their clothes home to wash them. So one day we were talking to Richard and his younger brother, and Richard was by far probably the more, I hate to say the word smart, but he was much more aware of the world than his younger brother, who was pretty severely developmentally delayed. And Richard mentioned that they didn't have any running water in their house. So my counselor, my counselor's name is Linda, she and I decided to do a home visit. And I can tell you, I will never, ever forget this home visit. So we go to this small, sort of dilapidated looking home. And we get out of the car and we go up to the door. And Richard's mom is a very nice person. I'd met her on previous occasions, but she was probably mildly mentally challenged, to say the least. I never ever saw the father, but we go into the house and the house is filthy. I mean, like the worst sort of filth you can imagine. And she's cooking some beans on the stove, and as Linda and I are standing there talking to her, I watch the roaches crawling into the bean pot and out of the bean pot. Because they hadn't had any water and they didn't have electricity, they were using the bathtub as a toilet. And it was almost filled to the brim with horrible, horrible things. And I thought, as I stood there and talked to this mom, who, like I said, was very mentally challenged herself, she probably was doing the best she could do. But it dawned on me that Richard was the most intelligent, most with it, I guess, of anyone in that family. So, like I said, Glenda, my counselor, was amazing. And we brought in a lot of people to help. And we were able to get them into a family, I'm not sure what it's called now, but it was like a family assisted living center kind of thing where they took in the whole family, made sure they had food and water and clean clothes, and began to teach the mom and the boys hygiene and all of those kinds of things. And Richard taught me through that experience that some of our kids live in situations that I could not even imagine before that time. I mean, I knew there was poverty. I'd seen poverty. It wasn't bad. But like I said, quite frankly, we wouldn't let a dog or cat live in these conditions. You know, they would have been confiscated by the Humane Society or whomever. But yet I had 2 children who were living in it. So why am I telling you these stories? Don't assume when our children in the urban environment come to school and we see outward behaviors that we think need to be disciplined. Sometimes that's the only way the children have to express their experiences and what they're living. Joaquin was late because he was getting 4 siblings ready to go to school. I mean, I had a hard time. I only had 1 child. I had a hard time getting her ready to go to school. You know, the kids have a pureness of heart and an innocence. Brad taught me that no matter their situation, they just want to be loved. And if you do show them the least amount of love and caring, they will give it back to you 1,000-fold. David, that was my regret, that I didn't know, that I didn't figure it out, that we have to take the time to get to know all of our children, because if we don't, tragedy can ensue in their lives. And finally, Richard, like I said, he was a kid that you'd look at and he was hard to like, in that, like I said, he was so filthy and smelled so bad. But thankfully, I had some amazing people on my team who saw something beyond them and made this child's life livable. All our kids matter, guys. All of our kids need us. And we have to dig deep and find them. Let's move on and talk about Spence Middle School. So after being at Rosemont for several years, I was, quote, promoted. In Dallas, you did a good job at a school. That meant you stayed there 3 years and they moved you to another school that was a mess, and see if you could fix that one too. So they moved me from Rosemont Elementary to middle school. My teaching experience was pre-K through 6 and 9 through 12. I have never, ever, ever worked in middle school when they made me the principal. Spence Middle School, as I told you, sits in the shadows of City Place and near downtown Dallas. It's now a really nice uptown kind of hip, urban hipster kind of neighborhood. But at the time that I was there, it had the highest crime rate in the city of Dallas, the neighborhood did. We had 36 identified gangs in the school. Drive-bys were commonplace. If you don't know what a drive-by is, that is when gang members drive by and shoot up people's homes, other gang members, and oftentimes, unfortunately, there is collateral damage. We also, when I arrived at the school, I noticed the first time I ever walked in, it's a very old historical building. It was built back in the early 30s. I noticed that there were bullet holes along the front of the school. So not only were people driving by and shooting up homes and the community, they also shot up the school. So it was a pretty rough neighborhood. So as I got to Spence, and again, I just had the most amazing team of teachers. We started talking about what were the problems in our school. And I think the more we talked about the issues we were facing and the fact that we had all these identified gangs, we realized that the root cause of all of that was there was a huge lack of trust. There was a lack of relational trust and a lack of organizational trust. So people didn't trust the school, people didn't trust each other. And as a result of that, there was a lot of conflict. Fights were commonplace in the school, students would act out, etc. So we began to work on that and those elements. and we began to try to build relationships with all of our students. So every single student in the school had mentors. I convinced Fidelity, which is a, what are they? I should know this, I have money with them. They're a financial services company. They happen to have their headquarters at City Place. So I went over there and pleaded my case, and lo and behold, Fidelity gave me 60 mentors, and they gave them release time from work to come over and work with our students. So twice a week, the Fidelity mentors, and we paired them with our most challenging students who really needed a mentor. The other students, we had faculty mentors, staff mentors. I mentored kids. I mean, anybody that was a living, breathing person in the building was mentoring. But my Fidelity partners would come over twice a week, and they would bring lunch to the kids, which was a huge treat. And they would spend about an hour with them. Pretty huge difference, a huge, huge difference. So we worked constantly to build that relational trust. The other thing we did is we worked very hard to build organizational trust. And Spence had an interesting mix of students. We were predominantly Hispanic, but we also had one of the largest Asian student populations in the city. Now, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about kids who were street kids in parts of Southeast Asia that came to us. They were in some of the most dangerous gangs you can imagine. They weren't the stereotype we think of as Asian students. So this was a pretty challenging group. So to help us with that, I convinced the Dallas Police Department. Back then we didn't have like a school resource officer program or anything like that. We had a Dallas City police officer who's run the high schools, but we didn't have them in the middle schools. So I convinced the Dallas Police Department, along with some of my teachers and some of those Fidelity partners, that we really needed some help. Not help in terms of from a discipline standpoint, but help with mentoring and working with our kids. Because we had such a high gang incidence in the school and the community, the gang officers started coming to our school and mentoring and working with our students. And it completely changed that dynamic. The number of gang incidences in the neighborhood dropped completely. And we met with some of the big gang leaders in the community, and basically we made an agreement with them. And we said, we understand that sometimes our students belong to gangs because they have to survive in the community. All we're asking is that when they walk in through the doors of Spence Middle School every day, that they get to be just a 12-year-old kid. They don't have to be, be part of MS-13 or Eastside Locos or any of these other gangs that were so widely spread across our community. And putting my mouth where my heart was, I began, and the police thought I was insane when I did this, but I knew I could trust my kids. We saw the incidences of gangs and fights go from hundreds literally to zero as we built that community. And so the street that we were on, Capitol Street in Dallas, was lined with gang houses, up one side, down the other. And a lot of my students who were not involved in gangs were terrified to walk down those streets. So I began every day after school, I walked with my students all the way down that street, got every single one of them home, and turned around and walked back. And I remember the head of the gang unit for the Dallas PD said to me, he said, "Tracy, you're crazy." I said, "No, I'm not, because I know my kids, and they know that I love them, and I care about them, and I will fight to the end of the earth for them." Those kids protected me. They protected me from everything. We also used a discipline program from Boys Town. I don't know if you're familiar with Boys Town, but it's basically a home for orphaned and disadvantaged, and oftentimes students with a lot of problems. It is a boys' school. There was actually a movie made back in like the 30s about it. But they have a discipline program. We instituted that program. And the whole idea behind it is that discipline is not about punishment. Discipline is about teaching. So we taught our kids, how do you respectfully disagree with somebody? How do you handle it when someone confronts you? It made a world of difference. The other thing that we did is we trained we were in teams of teachers and students, and we had 2 trained mediators who were trained in conflict resolution on each one of our teams across the campus. And we constantly worked that when the student was upset or angry or whatever, we were able to de-escalate the student before it became something huge. And then I guess the final piece, we did a lot at Spencer, and we really did turn that culture around. Our achievement scores went through the roof. Our discipline incidences came down to basically 0. It was like the most affirming, incredible experience, and I can give every bit of credit to my teachers for that. But we were still struggling with getting parents actively involved. And, and we kept thinking, well, let's redefine what parent involvement means. But I had a ton of different cultures in the school at the time. So we decided that we were going to do a World Cultures Dinner. And basically, it was just a good old-fashioned potluck. You probably can't get away with that nowadays. I'm sure there's some health rule against it, but we did it anyway. And we had parents bring their favorite dish from their home country. And we asked the parents to stand by their dishes as people would come through the sample room and tell us their stories. I was hoping, we had about 1,200 students. I was hoping to get maybe 30, 40 people. I had almost 600 parents show up with pride. We also asked them to wear something from their home country. And, they're in these beautiful clothes and they're bringing this food and they're so excited to share a bit of themselves with us. And that was our turning point. From then on, we had many, many, many different events and activities and all, but that school supported every single thing we did. Life affirming, life changing. And it all comes down to, guys, if there's anything that you ever need to do as a teacher, a principal, a central office leader, trust, trust, trust. It has to be built, it has to be earned, and then it has to be maintained. So, any questions about what we did at Spence? And then I'm going to finish this out. Okay, let's talk about MacArthur High School. So, after I had been in Dallas for a number of years, I decided to go to work for the Irving School District. Now, a lot of people think of the Irving School District as Las Colinas, where the Cowboys were, and all that stuff. That's not it. That part of Irving is actually in the Carrollton Farmers Branch School District. Irving ISD is actually what I call a suburban urban school district. It had every characteristic of an urban school system. And most of the students lived in government subsidized housing. We had a very high poverty rate, all of those kind of things. So the actual physical high school, I'll never forget this. So I had just been named principal there and I'd never actually seen the school. So my best friend, who was a principal in Dallas too, she and I drove over to MacArthur High School and we're driving around the school and they have these beautiful tennis courts. And my friend looks at me and she goes, "This must be a white school." And I looked at her, I'm like, "What?" She said, "They have tennis courts. Look how nice this building is." So one of the things that I realized in Irving was Dallas didn't do a very good job at the time of keeping up their buildings. We were constantly fighting, the problems of old buildings. Irving invested very heavily in the physical campus because they wanted, through those actions, for the students that came to their schools, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, for their schools to look like, and they were comparable to, the nicest school in the most affluent suburb. Taught me right then and there that does make a huge, huge difference. Now, when I got to MacArthur, I noticed immediately, because remember, I'd been in the highest gang school in the entire district in Dallas. And I noticed there was a lot of gang activity in MacArthur High School. Well, I come to find out that the principal before me at the end of the school year stood proudly in front of everyone and said, "We don't have gangs at this school. We're all partners," their mascot. Well, he was really wrong. They had a ton of gangs. So many gangs that a student the previous year had been killed in the school in a gang fight. So the first thing we did was we had to address that gang issue, which we did. and we had to tell the truth. So we worked really, really hard to rid ourselves of the gang problems and to create a focused, disciplined environment. When I got to MacArthur, we were having 3 to 5 major fights a day. There was no discipline. In fact, I look back on it fondly, but that year in the yearbook, normally as a principal, you're lucky if they'll put your picture in the yearbook. They did a 2-page spread in the yearbook on me that said I had actually not been a principal in Dallas ISD, I'd been a prison guard. Because I had to come in and immediately with my team establish these are the rules, these are the regulations, this is how we react, this is what we do. We had to really impose some pretty strict discipline procedures to get the school under control because it was completely out of control. Then we began to work on what I call the mindset. Now, a lot of people might disagree with me, but I grew up in Plano, Texas. At the time, I know some of you are like, oh, wow. Yeah, at the time, there was only one high school in Plano. That tells you how old I am. We had won the state football championship. And I remember how just amazing that was. And so I had several coaches, including my football coach, my baseball coach. They hadn't won a game in years. Talk about demoralizing. So I got this great idea that since I knew I was going to be replacing my coach, I needed somebody really special to come in. Well, lo and behold, we ended up hiring this really young, and if you've ever worked in Texas with high school football, this is like revolutionary. I hired this 32-year-old coach to be my head football coach and athletic director. Apparently, on some website called the Old Coaches, whatever, I was the talk of Texas. I had lost my mind. But what I knew about this man was he had been the head football coach at North Dallas High School, where Spence Middle School fed into. And when I'm interviewing, he didn't know at the time I'd been the principal at Spence. He's talking about Jeffrey Durley and Adam Durley, who I knew. They were my students at Spence. And about how they had made it through. They were seniors, they were playing football, they were both getting scholarships. And I knew at that moment I found the right person because I didn't think, quite honestly, that Jeff or Adam would have ever even made it to high school, let alone graduate. So we began building and we began believing and we convinced the students. In fact, before we would take our state assessments, my associate principal and I would go to every single classroom. We talk to students about, the other schools in our district may be better at, blah, 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 but we're the smartest and we're going to prove it because we're going to outscore them. So somehow through our sales pitch, we convinced our students that they were the smartest and that we could win at anything we chose to do. And so it was all about changing that mindset. And lo and behold, the kids delivered because we convinced them that we believed in them, which we really did. So we went from a 0-10, 0 wins, 10 losses football season to the very next year we had 9 wins, 1 loss. The following year we were a perfect 10-0, went to the playoffs for the first time in Lord knows how many, if ever, years. And we started winning on the field. We also began winning in the classroom because, again, like I said, my teachers worked their tails off. We changed that mindset for our kids. And we went from the lowest scoring high school in the district to not only the highest scoring, we became a recognized campus. We were named a National Blue Ribbon School of Excellence, one of the very few truly diverse, low socioeconomic high schools in the country to do that. 3 years later, we were named the best school in America by the Intel Foundation. And it all goes back to 3 things. I had the most amazing group of people. They worked their tails off. They believed in these kids. They held these kids accountable. They did everything you can imagine to build relationships with our kids. In fact, it still amazes me to this day. I have over 1,000 students from MacArthur High School who are still my Facebook friends because we had this unbelievable relationship with our kids. And it all goes back to I was smart enough to hire people that were smarter, better, harder working, anything than me. It was truly the dream team. We were relentless. We did not ever give up on our kids. And we stood for them when nobody else would. So to give you an example, we were at a football game with our big, huge rival, Irving High School. We always knew there were going to be problems because we just knew. Huge rivalry, community issues, etc. So I'm sitting in the stands, and I was one of those crazy principals to make every one of my assistant principals go with me. We didn't just go and watch the game. We were policing, not in the back. You know what I'm saying? We were interacting with the kids in the crowd, and we were everywhere. Over the radio, I hear the Irving Police Department, and I catch the name of the student. I won't tell you his last name, but Patrick. And I thought, uh-oh, what's going on? So Patrick apparently had been speeding through the parking lot. I know you're shocked, at the football game, the high school student speeding. And when they stopped him for speeding, he became belligerent. So I go out there to the parking lot, and I'm not exaggerating. Here's Patrick in the center with a circle of police officers. There had to have been 20 police officers for one kid who was speeding. Now I know Patrick. I knew Patrick well. Patrick has temper. And I find one of the police officers that I happen to know, and I said, can I talk to you? And he's like, Tracy, it's not going to make any good. And I said, just let me talk to him. So I go through there. I kind of grab Patrick by the shoulder and by the collar, and I'm like, can you talk to me? And I said, I want you to look just at me. Do not look around you. I said, Patrick, the only thing standing between you and those police officers and going to jail and then doing Lord only knows what to you is me. I said, Patrick, have I ever lied to you? And he said, no. I said, I need you to calm down. I said, I'm not going to let them take you to jail because they'll have to take me too. I said, I'm not going to let them hurt you, but you've got to calm down. Patrick and I talked for maybe 5 minutes. And I said, now I'm going to ask you to do something that will solve this problem. I'm not saying that you have to do it. I'm just saying it'll solve the problem so that you can go on with your night, I can go on with mine, and we prevent what could be a real tragedy. Because I said, I love you. I care about you. You know that. He said, I know. And I said, I want you to go to every one of those police officers and shake their hands and tell them that you're calm and you're okay. Patrick did that. I somehow convinced 20 police officers not to take this young man off and do Lord knows what and end up in jail. The only reason that could happen was because there was a huge amount of trust between myself and this young man. Because I knew what usually happened with our kids when they got arrested. And I was not going to let that happen to Patrick. So it was that relentless belief that I got your back. No matter what, I've got your back. And the kids grew to trust us, believe in us. I could give you 1,000 different situations where one of my team members, myself, whatever, we were able to prevent a tragedy. Because remember, I never forgot about them. I didn't want there to be another David on my list. And so we believed and we convinced our kids that we were the best. We were the best at everything we decided to do because we had grit, we had integrity, we loved and cared about each other, and we were truly a family. And like I said, I'm very proud to say we had 100% graduation rate. We had more Division I football scholarships that year than any school in the entire Texas, which is huge. We had absolutely amazing results. And again, I had the greatest kids in the world, but most importantly, I had a team. And a team, when you develop that, guys, you can do anything. We literally did the impossible. In fact, they still talk about the dream years that was MacArthur, when we had that amazing team together. So I tell you all this to give you hope, to show you that it can work. I'm not going to go through these. You can read them. They're pretty simple. But I thought too that, as we think about this and how this all works, collaboration was the key to the success of the teams at the 3 schools I highlighted. But here are some things to avoid so that you don't sabotage that collaboration. And probably the most point, we actively sought other points of view. So that was really helpful. I'm not going to talk about that one. I really wanted to hoard my talent. I really did not want anybody on that team to ever leave. I took it personally when a teacher got a promotion or something like that. But I also knew that we had grown people so much that they had great opportunities. We never want to shut down an idea. We want to have, like I said, that unbridled tenacity. We spent a ton of time together. Every year for one full day, we did some sort of a big team building activity. Took my whole staff bowling one year. Another year we went to, it's a piano bar. No, we didn't do the bar part, but we did the piano, like doing pianos and sing-alongs. And we just always tried to do stuff that was fun together because we like to be together. We had huge tailgating parties with the community. We even invited the opposing team's families to come and tailgate with us. I had great sponsors. The gentleman who owned all the Sonic drive-ins in Irving sponsored us. And so we would go to a game and we'd have 2,000 hot dogs and stuff that had been donated to us and passed them out free. Really fun, amazing events. We asked for help when we needed it. We absolutely spent time acknowledging other people's contributions. So we have to be there for our kids. We all know that. And it's hard work, it's exhausting. But I promise you there's nothing that is more empowering, worthwhile, affirming than knowing that we made a real difference for lots and lots of kids. So, let me see if I can figure out how to stop sharing this. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So, what are your thoughts? Anything? I'm reading some of the comments. Thank you. I didn't mean to make you guys cry. I do have to tell you a funny story though, real quick. This will make you laugh. So, in a high school, at least in my day in Texas, the weekly pep rally was like the hugest deal ever. We found out 1 week before school was to start that our big, huge competition gym and 17 classrooms that were attached to it. It was this huge dome structure. Sorry, I'm making we found out that it had been condemned, that it was literally in danger of imminent collapse. So we are scrambling the week before school starts to relocate 17 classrooms, find places for all our PE classes, what we're going to do about basketball games, what we're going to do about all the things we held in the competition gym. So I had a student advisory group, and so I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm at a loss here. So I turned it over to them. So they decided that instead of the big pep rally, we would do lunchtime pep rallies. So we had 3 lunch periods. So it kind of worked out that we had the band met during the lunch period, cheerleading met during the lunch period, etc. So we started doing every week what we called lunchtime pep rallies. So we had the band and the drum line and the cheerleaders and the dancers and I don't remember, the fire truck crew, everybody in there. The students came up with probably the best solution ever. We didn't miss a single minute of class time, which the teachers were happy about. They still got to have fun and completely solved our problems. So the students knew that that was their idea. So talk about buy-in and support. It was really, really cool and fun. So we made a video of these pep rallies. I had a great tech person who put all this together. So we are at the National Blue Ribbon Schools Conference, and I knew I was supposed to speak at it. I didn't know I was the keynote that day until I walked in that morning, thinking I was just on a panel. I am the keynote. I freak out. So thank goodness I'd taken my team with me. So I call Rhonda, my tech person. I'm like, oh my God, do you have that video? I've got to have something to fill this time. So it's a very nice video, but it's of our kids having fun, and she put all this stuff in together and just kind of showed really the culture and climate of our school. At that conference, I had probably 200 people asking for a copy of that video. And I'm just like, whew, thank goodness, because if Rhonda had not been there to save my butt, I would have made an absolute fool of myself in front of this huge convention, not knowing. So Team makes all the difference. Okay, questions, comments, concerns? Okay, guys, it is 7:03 p.m., so I've taken 10 minutes of your time that I need to give back to you. So if you don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the night. Thanks, guys. Y'all have a great night. Bye. Or maybe bye. There it goes.